Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jake McGuire. And today, we're going to be talking about teams that are regressing to the mean. And teams will kind of cover. We'll cover a couple of teams that we think are going to regress towards the mean in a positive direction, and then teams that are going to regress towards the mean in a negative direction, and do the same for players. So I know I keep saying regression to the mean over and over again. But this exercise, I think, is a good way to show that sometimes when you have these teams at the top of the league and these teams at the bottom of the league, it is sometimes easy for them year to year to kind of get closer to average than stay at those two locations or those two extremes. And I think that's kind of what we're highlighting in this episode.
Yeah, when you hear the word regression, you often think of it being negative, right? Like a negative movement, like you're getting worse or something like that. But regression is really like you're talking about moving toward the mean. It can be positive as well. It's like I just scribbled it on a sticky note. If you're watching on YouTube, it can mean you're either going up toward the mean, like if you're a bad team. Regressing means you might go from 4 wins to 8.5 wins now that the NFL decided to add that 17th game. Or you could be a really good team that maybe won 15 games, like we'll talk about today, and go back toward that 8.5. It's kind of like the word accelerate. People hear accelerate and think it means speed up or change your velocity in a positive way. It also means changing it in a negative way. It's just a change in velocity. That's kind of what regression is. I know we're both math guys, so we had to get a little nerdy on the definition part. But when we're talking about regression and especially teams primed for it, I think you start with some of the teams that picked at the top of the draft that maybe had 3, 4, 5 wins that might get closer to 8.5 this season because of some improvement, because that certain units they have might regress back to the mean. Like, for example, the Carolina Panthers, the first team we'll talk about, we'll say it over and over, had the worst defense in NFL history, the worst scoring defense. I think they allowed the second most total yards, third most rushing yards. They were 32nd in every single efficiency category. That has to improve, right? There's no way year over year that you're consistently the worst defense in NFL history. And that alone, coupled with some of the additions they've made, can help the Panthers regress toward league average and take that next step with Dave Canales in his second year and with Bryce Young in his third year.
The Panthers are definitely primed to take that step. Whether or not the investment they made in the draft, in free agency, pays off is a completely different story. Obviously, like you said, because of that aspect of regression, you anticipate this unit and the investment made in this unit, it's going to get better. And it most likely will, but we don't know to extent. And that's something we're going to analyze throughout the year, next offseason, the offseason after that. And that's what kind of gives us discussion and talking points. But when we talk about teams that are primed for that, the Carolina Panthers are front and center. And the team that they play week 1, I think, is also in the same boat. Yeah. And Liam, they draft Travis Hunter after moving up, making a big splash trade with the Cleveland Browns. And you can see that they're really gearing towards being a very explosive offense that can access different areas of the field and do different things schematically that puts a lot of pressure on the defense. So I think when you look at that, you look at the investment they've made along the defensive line, there's reason to hope that they can take a climb from being a bottom feeder to potentially an average team has, I would say, division title hopes. But it is going to be interesting with the AFC South, and we'll get more into that in a couple months when we break down that division.
For sure. And with the Panthers regression in mind, it's kind of like they had a historically bad unit, and even if the offense stays the same, the defense will help carry them to more wins. With the Jaguars, it's that they have the talent. It wasn't like that they were talentless like the Panthers were. It's that I think the talent played down to their level that they're able to play at. I think the coaching certainly didn't help. And if you can get a creative play caller in there like Liam Cohen, new blood in the defensive coaching room where is Ryan Nielsen, right, was their guy last year, really struggled. I think the high-end talent that they do have, especially at premium positions, can help take them to more wins. This is a team that I guess 1.5 seasons ago was 8-3, right, and looked primed to follow up a playoff berth and take that next step. And then it all just cratered. And then last year they had injuries. The players didn't play super, super well outside of rookie Brian Thomas. But now you have Brian Thomas, Travis Hunter, who we think is the best player in the draft, I think we still, to a degree, believe in what Trevor Lawrence can be, what his highs can be. And then, like you said, on the defensive side of the ball, you have 2 former first-round pick edge rushers that can help anchor that defensive unit. This team has the talent. It's just like, can the talent play up to their potential, and can that push the Jaguars closer to league average this season?
It's one of those situations we feel like, or at least I feel like I've been talking about the Jaguars in this same light over the past couple seasons. And so like, I don't know if I was almost hesitant to talk about him this episode and maybe talk about another team like the Raiders that did a lot, going from, again, that bottom feeder to a potentially league average team that is going to be able to kind of, I would say, contend week in and week out and play some good football down the stretch. But in the case of the Jaguars, it seems like inevitable. You have all this talent. At some point, something's got to click. And if it doesn't, then it's just one of those situations where you have this young core of players that's highly touted because you had a bunch of top 10 picks, but maybe those top 10 picks aren't that great. It's like the Green Bay Packers on defense. Like, how many of their starters are first round picks? And it's like that makes it seem like this is going to be a really good group, a top 10 unit. And that they're right now, I would say, average. I wouldn't say that the Packers are this mind melding, mind blowing defense of a unit. And so I think that just goes back to when we talk about the Jaguars, that I think some of it is just kind of skewed based on how much draft capital has been poured into either side.
Yeah, I think the Jags in particular, right? It has to work out for them because they invested so heavily in this year. They don't have a first round pick next year, right? That was the Travis Hunter trade. And I think I leaned more toward the Jaguars on this list over the Raiders, who I think will also be a good and fun team to watch. It's because the Jaguars have the infrastructure on their roster. There's so much change with the Raiders, right? New general manager, new coach, new quarterback, new running back, a lot of new players on the offense and defensive side of the ball. And when there's so much change like that, sometimes it doesn't, like, sometimes all of them aren't super, super positive instant changes. Whereas with the Jaguars, I think we know what Trevor Lawrence can be. It's just up to Liam Cohen and the new regime to get the best out of him and get him back to the second half of that playoff game, not the first half, because that was more of what we saw this past season. But if he can get back to the comeback kid against the Chargers, I think the Jaguars are primed for, I think, like you said, they can contend in the AFC South, which, while the Texans are probably still the number 1 team there, I think it's more open than it has been the past couple years.
It is, and it will be interesting because, like the Colts, if you have competent quarterback play from Daniel Jones, they could be winning 8-9 games, and you could kind of have this division race that is coming down the 3 teams down the stretch. And it'll make for very engaging football, and especially I think with having the first overall pick, like at that rate, you have Trevor Lawrence, Cam Ward. Do they have any other first overall? CJ Stroud was the number 2
He was
overall,
number 2, and then Richardson was 4 in that same draft, right? So really high invested QBs. I think we are both kind of out on Richardson to this point, but maybe the new stuff they added can help turn his career around as well. I think there are a lot of teams due for positive regression at the top of the draft because it's really hard to have back-to-back first overall picks. The Jaguars did it, right? But we think that a lot of those teams will improve. On the other end of the spectrum, however, there's a couple of teams won 15 games last year. And while it might be natural to think that they move down 1 or 2 wins, I think both the Lions and the Chiefs are due for maybe a larger regression than we think. Starting with the Lions, I think they're incredibly talented, right? But there is a ton of brain drain in the coaching room, both on offense and defense. They didn't just lose their coordinators. They lost a lot of position coaches as well, And on their offensive line, they're replacing the 3 interior starters that they had last year. So I think that while they are a very talented team, I don't know if we can expect the Detroit Lions to be as imposing a team, especially on offense, as they were last season.
So I have a question for you in regards to the Detroit Lions and the guy who's taken over for the offensive kind of play caller coordinator position. Outside of Detroit, because I think, or actually, I won't even say Detroit. Detroit had a good screen game. Outside of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with what Liam Cohen did last year, who would you put up kind of towards the top as being a premier screen game team across the NFL last year?
I was going to say Shanahan, but not last year. Lee Cohen's the only one that comes to mind. Maybe the Broncos as well, because they tend to favor the heavy personnel looks. And if that's the direction you're pushing me in, you can kind of see the connection there because their new offensive coordinator is from Denver, right? Is that kind of what you were intimating there with that question?
Well, John Morton was the passing game coordinator with the
Mhm.
Denver Broncos, and so obviously you have the Sean Payton connection between Dan Campbell and now John Morton. But I think in that scenario, when you see the personnel that the Detroit Lions tried to get on the field with being bigger, with not only their offensive line but having some of these tight end packages, or having I would say 21 personnel. I was about to say 12 personnel, but having those looks where you have a fullback, you have a couple tight ends on the field, and you're just bigger, and being able to use screens and play action off of that, I think is huge, and that's an element that they aren't going to necessarily miss. To your point, though, Ben Johnson is probably one of the greatest play callers right now in the NFL. Like we're talking about a guy that's top 5. So you're getting a drop from that. You just had your superstar center retire, and now you have some reshuffling on the interior. So even though exterior pressure generates a lot more negative plays at a higher frequency, interior pressure isn't good either. Like it may not be as bad, but that is something to monitor. And you just wonder, okay, David Montgomery, he's getting a little bit older. He hasn't been super efficient. Is Jahmyr Gibbs, like he's a breakout candidate for like that year 3, but it's like, okay, so he's going to have a lot more on his shoulders. Amon-Ra and Jamison Williams going to be able to continue doing what they're doing. Does somebody get hurt out of those superstar playmakers, and does that put stress on everybody else? There's just a lot of moving pieces because you lose a lot of your foundation, that it only takes 1 or 2 more guys for this to start falling apart very quickly.
I think the positive note with the Lions and what might keep them inelastic from regression, if we want to keep using econometrics terms there and economic terms, is that they had a horrible number of defensive injuries and IR members last season. And if that unit in particular regresses to being healthier, league average healthy, I think they can continue to contend at the top of the division. I think the problem is that the Vikings got a lot better. The Bears should be a lot better, especially with Ben Johnson going there, with the investment they had on the interior offensive line. And the Packers are always going to hang around in that division. So, where this is a team that won the division with 15 games last year, the Vikings also could have won, right? Sam Darnold, as you so lovingly put it, turned into a pumpkin in that final game of the regular season. And that's kind of what lost it for him. If McCarthy can play just as well as Darnold did, I don't see a world in which the Lions have a vice grip on the division, so to speak. And that could knock them down the playoff seeding. It could remove them from winning 14, 15 games. But I think the Lions are still in good shape based on their roster. And there's some continuity there. The defensive coordinator is from in-house. The Chiefs, on the other hand, the other team we talked about, I think this is the team much more primed to take a 3 or 4 win total subtraction from last year, maybe get to 10, 11 wins as opposed to 15, because despite the Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes connection throughout the tenure that both of them have been there, you could see the cracks starting to form throughout the season. And it ultimately culminated in the Super Bowl, where we're so used to seeing Mahomes and Reid carry, but they were completely outgunned, completely outcoached and outclassed. And we just saw a horrible performance with that horrible score bug. And I'll continue to keep mentioning that as well, because that was one of the worst things a primetime game has ever done. But I think the Chiefs are due for a pretty big regression toward league average. And I think other teams in that division can capitalize off of it. What are your thoughts on the Chiefs going forward this year?
Are we really about the bet against Patrick Mahomes after he just lost the Super Bowl? I mean, this is a team that took it very seriously that they lost the Super Bowl and knew exactly why they lost the Super Bowl. It's the same reason why they lost the first Super Bowl in the Andy Reid Mahomes era. It was they could not protect up front. So what do? They get one of the best left tackles in the draft in Josh Simmons. Hopefully his medical is clear, because I think if he's a healthy player, that could become your future left tackle, which fixes a lot of things on that Kansas City offensive line. They jettison Joe Tooney out, but they keep kind of that Creed and
Trey
I
Smith.
drug his name. Yep, Trey Smith. I drug his name through the mud on Twitter a couple months ago about just buyer beware, and then obviously the Chiefs keep him. But having those two, especially continuity in the run game, Jawan Taylor, you paid some big bucks a couple off seasons ago. at that point, it's you're circulating through a couple different options at left guard if Josh Simmons hit. And then if he doesn't, you just paid Jalen Moore, who played adequately in Trent Williams' kind of absence, to where maybe you feel comfortable about the offensive line. You get Rashee Rice coming back this year after he's done his suspension. Him and Xavier Worthy are an intriguing pairing. I think that is kind of the future past the Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill era that was kind of where Mahomes started. So I think that iteration, the offense is actually going to probably get better. I would say they would improve between the offensive line additions and those two wide receivers being on the field. And at that point, it's going to the defensive side of the ball. You haven't lost any brain drain, but guys are getting older. You did lose a couple pieces. That's where I'm more concerned about, is some of those closer games. Maybe the defense isn't able to do their part, and it puts more on Patrick Mahomes' shoulder. But everything we know about Patrick Mahomes, when it comes down to the final few minutes of the game, the drives that really count, he gets it done. And I don't think that's going to change necessarily this year. Are they going to win 15 games? No. But they haven't won any less than, I think, 11 games during Patrick Mahomes' era. So them winning 11, 12 games, them winning the AFC West, it all seems most likely. I get everybody's catching them, but this is a team that just won 15 games. Let's not, just because of the Super Bowl being the last game on our mind, on how that kind of translates and shifts our focus on Kansas City. Let's not let that be the deciding factor here.
They did win 15 regular season games, and really, you could say they played 16 regular season games because in the last week they benched all their starters. So you could say it was a 15-1 season, right? But I think they got a huge number of one-score wins. I just want to look it up and just to be sure. I think it was 7 or 8 one-score wins, and a lot of those, some crazy stuff happened at the end.
I would say it was honestly close to the 10 plus, but the issue was you had some games where they did have double-digit leads. The Panthers game, for instance. Panthers came back, made it a game, and then the Chiefs pulled away at the very end. But if you go back and watch some of these games, especially against some of the lesser competition that they're in these one-score games, they have double-digit leads at certain points in those games or certain durations, and it's more them letting a team back in rather than just finishing the job.
The old Chiefs wouldn't let teams back in, though. They would blow them out of the water. And I know you mentioned that the last time they had to bounce back like this, they did similar things. They knew what they had to address. They went and got Orlando Brown Jr. the last time that happened and put him at left tackle. I don't think that Josh Simmons, he's really good, but he does have the medical concern. And then Jalen Moore, who played something like 500 or 600 snaps last year, very, very limited number of snaps with San Francisco last year. Not sure those are as adequate of a replacement as Orlando Brown was at the time. And I think that they also had a really good infrastructure of Travis Kelce still being the best tight end in the world. One of the best receiving options in general, and Chris Jones was still sitting in the middle of his prime. Chris Jones isn't bad anymore by any means, but he's on the wrong side of 30. Travis Kelce is bad now. Last year, he was pretty bad. He's almost net negative at this point. He's still a really smart player. He'll be able to find soft spots in the zone, but you kind of remember how Jason Witten got at the end, and he kind of only did one thing and find the soft spot. That's kind of how I envision Travis Kelce being this season, especially if his athleticism continues to be limited. All of that to say, the other teams in the AFC, I think, are catching up. I just don't think that the Chiefs are going to be the top dog anymore. And if a lot of these one-score games go in the other direction next season, you could be looking at a 10-win team or an 11-win team. And I don't think that's insane to say that. I just think that the Chiefs, much like the early Patriots, there's going to be a time when the Chiefs aren't the top dog anymore. They got to do some self-building, some improvement before they can get back to the top. And especially with the Ravens and the Bills as I think the far and away leaders in the AFC, we should expect the Chiefs to take a step back and not be the 1 seed. Maybe the 3 or 4 seed is a more accurate, outcome for the Chiefs this season. And therein lies the regression.
4 seed. 4 seed is some crazy talk over here.
If you compared the Houston Texans roster to the Chiefs roster, I think you would find a lot more favorable position groups going to Houston. It's just that offensive line is very, very dubious. I mean, we talk about the Chiefs O-line. The Texans O-line isn't set in stone by any means, but the rest of their team, I think, is much better than the Chiefs. If I had to swap QBs or something like that, I would much rather have the Texans infrastructure than the Chiefs. Coaching aside.
The defense, I'll give you that. On offense, because we're talking about Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy, we don't know what the other receivers are outside of Nico Collins. Like Tank Dell's gotten hurt.
I
The
mean,
past
we
few
don't
years.
know if Rashee Rice is going to be 100% and play the whole year, you know?
And that's fair. I'm just saying we saw him play his whole rookie year. He didn't have an injury like history in college. It was kind of like a freak accident. That's where it's like you get one, I think, as an athlete, but I think when you look across the aisle, that's where it's like Tank Dell. You've seen 2 season-ending injuries already. You're seeing 2 rookie wide receivers, and one or both could be great, but we don't know. And then you have Nico Collins. So I'm not going to sit here and say the Texans skill position players on offense are better. Their play callers better than Andy Reid. It's like that infrastructure on offense, I think, definitely goes to the Chiefs. You're really just looking at defensive talent. And you're right. They don't have Daniil Hunter. They don't have Will Anderson. They have an aging Chris Jones who maybe has 1 or 2 good years left in the tank. And then you're relying on a lot of above average players on that group. So not taking anything away that they aren't going to probably be worse than the Bills and Ravens. I just think we're not giving them enough credit that even though there may be a 2, 3, 4 game slide, as you're suggesting, I think that they are still one of the better teams in the NFL, and they aren't getting their roses in this instance.
I don't know. I feel like the default is to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I'm not blaming you or saying that you didn't do this or whatever, but you did pick them to win the Super Bowl. And I picked the Eagles. And I thought, I mean, the Eagles are just so much of a better team. I think that's what we're seeing now. Mahomes and Reed are going to be the best pairing until one of them separates or until they're not a pairing anymore. But they are far from the best team nowadays, especially like best starters and best backups. They aren't even close to that anymore. And that's what they were in the early iteration of the Chiefs. I just think we're going to see them take a noticeable step back next year. 10 one-score games. I looked it up. 11 if you want to count 8 points, but I'm not going to count that. 10 one-score game wins.
I knew it was like close to double digits. It was insane. It's one of those things. They got the best shots as being a team that's won back-to-back Super Bowls. And just to wrap up, because we have been going on, I think, almost 10 minutes on the Chiefs. The other thing to consider when we're talking about this group, and it's like I don't want to say like, hey, like they aren't going to be like the Vikings of a couple of years ago where you win all these one-score games and then you regress. I think I lost my train of thought here, but it's more in the sense that I think we're not giving them. And it goes back to the Roses point, and I had it there, so we're just going to move on. But the Chiefs, you know what? Like screw this. No, I'm going to think this through. No, we aren't there yet.
Is it about giving them the benefit of the doubt?
No, it wasn't like a benefit of the doubt. It was like a statistic that I had in mind that I was just like, hey, the way this, like we're thinking about this is just a little bit off. And it's escaped me. It was like now twice where I've wanted to come to a point of like, hey, it's not giving them their roses because they're a really good team. And it's just, I don't think they're getting that here in this instance. But regardless, teams that we think are going to improve or get closer to the mean: Carolina Panthers, Jacksonville Jaguars. Teams that we think are going to kind of drop off a little bit: the Detroit Lions and the Kansas City Chiefs. Moving into players before we kind of wrap up, just a couple guys that we think will be up and down. We'll start, I think, with some bigger names, at least from a skill position standpoint. Saquon Barkley. If you go to guys that have had 400 touches, have even hit the 2,000 yards, they don't see production like that the next year. Your body isn't able to take it. The last season that I think we saw that was the 2019 Christian McCaffrey year. Came close again a couple years ago with the 49ers on their Super Bowl run. And you saw both years afterwards, he suffered season-ending injuries. He didn't play. And then you add on the Madden curse, and you just wonder if Saquon's even going to be like an average running back from a production standpoint. And I think if we're talking about a regression to the mean, I really do think we might see that in some more of the explosive plays, because even if he plays the full year, he's probably going to be dealing with nagging injuries that come from, again, having 400 plus touches.
I think when we look at players, regression is more so to what we expect of their average, more so than the mean, because a lot of the guys we're going to talk about are high-end players. I don't think it's necessarily, fair to think that Saquon Barkley will just become an average running back next year. I think he might get closer to 1,000 yards than 2,000. And I think that's to your point, a very fair expectation. it's hard to get to 2,000 yards. Only like a handful of players have done it. And despite the fact that he sat out game 17, despite the fact that he took some fourth quarters off, has a good offensive line in front of him, I think it's just fair and natural to expect that he's not going to hit 2,000 yards again. That's really, really hard to do. I think a positive regression on my front, it goes back to the Texans like we're talking about earlier. CJ Stroud had a really rough season last year, and I know the offensive line was a major part of it. But even on the plays when he was kept clean, he wasn't seeing the stuff like he was seeing in his rookie season. I think a big part of that is due to Bobby Slowick not being as creative as he was 2 years ago. A lot of the times in Stroud's rookie year, a lot of stuff was schemed wide open, and Stroud just had to find the read and hit it. And to his credit, he did that and won them a lot of games doing it. But when the things got chaotic this year, couldn't really make that happen. I think he's going to bounce back and play a lot better than he did last year. 31st, I think, in EPA per play for Stroud, which coming off of a rookie year where I believe he was top 5, stark difference. I think he's going to play much, much better. And then
he was not top 5. What are we smoking?
His rookie season?
What are we smoking? He was not that good. Jaden Daniels was top 5. CJ Stroud was not top 5. Let's pump the brakes a little bit. He had an above average rookie year. It was a really, really good rookie season in terms of other rookie quarterbacks. But let's not act like year one, he was just hitting it out of the park.
He was quite good. I got to do the medium or minimum player threshold. He was 6th in EPA per play his rookie season. So quite good.
Composite, or is that the adjusted?
It's EPA per play. According to Sumer Sports. So very, very good rookie season. I was wrong, not top 5, but certainly not average league average by any means. He 0.11 per play. The people above him were Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott, Josh Allen, Tua Tagovailoa, and Jordan Love. And if you remember, Jordan Love really came on strong the second half of that season, where he wasn't a rookie, but it was basically his rookie year. So I think Stroud's steep fall off last year, a lot of it was attributed to the stuff around him. And I think with some minor improvement there along the offensive line, with more cohesion, a new coordinator, I think he's going to get back closer to that 6th overall. I don't think he's going to be top 6 or 7 again, but he's certainly going to be like a top 15 most efficient quarterback or something like that. I think that's a fair regression to his sample size that we can expect.
But the sample size is complicated because of the offensive line in front of him. Like this is something where he was able to mitigate it to an extent last year because they had extra bodies in for pass protection. But if you have guys up front that cannot block, CJ Stroud isn't able to do what he does best, and that's make accurate throws down the field. So that's going to be the priority. I don't think the Texans situation necessarily changes unless the offensive line situation does, or they're able to mitigate it with a quick passing game, or the run game is able to keep pass rushers from like really kicking into full gear off the edge. So I don't think it has much to do with CJ Stroud. Like, yes, when we're looking at his efficiency, super efficient rookie year, not as efficient second year. But I think that has to do with what's going on around him, not necessarily his performance, because I still think he's making some of those big time throws down the field. Even last year, it was just we didn't see as much of it because he constantly had defenders in his lap that were moving him off his throwing platform and disrupting the timing of the play. So again, I think it goes back to you have to fix the 5 guys in front of him in order for him to perform to the level he's able to. So yes, is a regression from a production standpoint. I think from a play standpoint, he as a player hasn't really changed. Like where we're talking about teams and player performance that goes along with that. A lot of the other teams we talked about, there are driving forces behind that. I don't think CJ Stroud himself is going to change. A guy who I think's body is changing and is going to hold him back, despite him, I guess, claiming the Olympic gold medalist, the runner in the 100-meter. Tyreek Hill has pretty much tried to challenge him to different races. He's not getting any response, but I don't think Tyreek Hill has the step or speed he has had in the past. And I think the regression from the high efficiency numbers back to player that we talked about literally a couple of days ago with the wide receiver Mount Rushmore, where this is a guy that we can talk about as an all-time great, as changing the game. He's no longer that player. And so I think him being a more average producer, maybe being closer to the end of the road, is I think a realistic thing for Tyreek Hill at this point.
I agree. Only a couple of times in his career that he hasn't hit over 1,000 receiving yards. It's kind of the benchmark for a high-end producer in the NFL today. And he almost got there. I think it was like 970 yards or something like that. But that was with some turmoil in the QB room. And I think he's just getting older, right? That speed can't hold on forever. I think that's one of the first things to go when you start aging, especially as an athlete. And I think a role in which he kind of plays second fiddle to Jalen Waddle might be best for him this season. But yeah, I think that's totally fair for Tyreek Hill to move back toward league average, back toward what older receivers tend to do. Not everybody's Jerry Rice, right? Like we talked about, who continuously puts up 1,200 yards his entire career until he's like 38. So I think that's a pretty fair one to expect this season.
Yeah, they go back because this is just circle back to a point because like I was frustrated earlier that I didn't remember. It was the Tyreek Hill trade from Kansas City that shifted their whole offensive identity. They went from searching for explosives to we're going to take all the checkdowns. And so Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, they talked, or at least Patrick Mahomes has alluded that Andy Reid wants them to cut it loose a little bit more. And so that's why I think I'm a little bit more hype about Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy. I think they can be more vertical field stretchers in the passing game from what we've seen from them in the past. And when we talk about vertically stretching the field, and we keep talking about like guys on a negative downturn, and this might be the last guy before we talk about a few guys that are kind of on the up and up. Chris Godwin with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They draft Buka in the first round, which from a value standpoint, I think is really good. Mike Evans is still the number one bell cow there. You have a couple other wide receivers you drafted in on like day 3 that are vying for targets and snaps. And so Chris Godwin coming off a season-ending injury, being really, really efficient prior to that injury, and I think being over 30 years old, I just don't know if he's still got it. Like this is a guy that I think everyone else around him has the opportunity to overtake him. And that's one of those things that does Godwin still have enough in the tank to keep them at bay?
He was about to get paid like he still got it. If you see the reports, especially over the past couple of weeks, like what the Patriots and Steelers were willing to offer him, they were going to give him $30 million a year. So they certainly thought he still had it. But I think I'm leaning more toward your opinion, right? This is a guy that I think turns 30 this year or is 30. Was leading the league in yards after the catch prior to his injury. And with a knee injury like that, being a bit older, your replacement may be waiting in the wings. I think it's fair to expect his production to take a step back. We also are seeing 2 years in a row now that he had one coordinator take a head coaching job, right? Dave Canales left, still played well under Liam Cohen, but now Liam Cohen's gone. I don't know if we can expect the new coordinator to continue to find wrinkles to maximize the players like that. It's kind of rare that you have back-to-back different guys be able to do that at high levels. So I think that's another factor there. But yeah, I think it's fair for Chris Godwin to maybe take a step back this year. It's really hard for somebody of his age, especially coming off an injury like that, to continue to produce at a high level and lead the league at a certain thing.
You're absolutely correct. I will say I'm intrigued by the Buccaneers. It hasn't necessarily worked out for a ton of teams, but they aren't necessarily using this as a promotion of like a head coach, like a Brian Schottenheimer with the Dallas Cowboys. But they hire internally their passing game coordinator last year, I think Grizzard. They retain their offensive line coach, which I think is huge for the development of that young group that's, I think, vying for a top 5, top 10 unit across the NFL. So I think you have the infrastructure in the place where there are going to be abundance of targets for wide receivers. It's just a matter of who's going to be on the field. And like you said, there's a lot of mouths to feed, and you can't lose a step. And that's what I'm worried about with Chris Godwin in terms of age, the injury history. But a guy that I think is kind of on the up and up, has been banged up recently, but I think the hamstring injury wasn't severe enough to where I think he can't take that step to being a top 3 wide receiver. Top 3 is probably a little rich, but for sure top 5, and he might already be there, but Nico Collins with the Texans. And I know we talked about CJ Stroud, and the whole thing with him taking a step is that front unit. But I think part of the reason why we saw a dip in Stroud's performance last year is there were stretches that not only did he have this abysmal offensive line play, Nico Collins wasn't in the lineup. And when you look at his efficiency numbers, very similar to Chris Godwin, dude was blowing it out of the water, came back, was still playing at a very high level. And he's a young enough wide receiver on his second contract that I think this is his time to shine and show this is his league. And to me, that jump he would be taking would be very similar to the jump that we've seen, I think, Devontae Adams and Stephon Diggs take over the past decade, where these were promising wide receivers on their rookie contracts. They hit that second contract, and it was just a whole nother gear kind of came up. And I think that's the case right now for Nico Collins, is he can really, based on the efficiency metrics that we've seen, based on the production we've already seen from him, he can actually start producing. And this is kind of where I was alluding to earlier. This isn't a regression to the mean of the league average. This is the regression to elite average, because he is an elite player and he's entering that tier. So I don't know if that really fits the criteria of what we're talking about, but I did want to sneak in Nico Collins because I think him and CJ Stroud, their success are tied together.
Yeah, I agree. Not only is he really, really good, I think he'll bounce back and is such a key component of that Texans offense. I think the ability to stretch the field in a way he does, and he's not a speedster by any means, but he's big and fast and can get behind safeties. And I think that, especially in Stroud's rookie season, that was such a crucial part, to be able to go 20, 25 yards downfield to Nico Collins and know that he's going to be able to catch it. Even on some underthrown or contested catches, he's always bringing it down. So I think as far as maybe getting to his ceiling, that's not really a regression, but maybe a breakout to his ceiling, I'm certainly with you there. As far as a younger player that we might not have been super huge fans of, but I think can be closer to league average, maybe regress toward the expectation of a first-round pick, I think is Xavier Legette. I really think that despite them taking Tedero McMillan, despite Thielen receiving a pay raise, Adam Thielen, that is, this past season, I think both of those guys are going to help free up Xavier Legette. When he's at his best, he's not necessarily like a pure Deebo Samuel gadget player, but I think using him horizontally, getting him across the field, is where he can become a mismatch. And now that the Panthers aren't bottom feeders at like most of their positions, now that they have legitimate receivers across the board, they can use him in the intended way. And I think that can bring him up from, I think it was like 470 yards, closer to the 800 or 900 yard mark, where you would expect a first round receiver to produce.
My issue with Legette, and I know you brought him up, but I think I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I think when you're as explosive as a player as he is, or he tries to be, is his selling point is that, hey, when you put the ball in my hands, I can go 0 to 60 real quick. And with that comes a bunch of injuries. So we saw him miss time last year in the offseason, didn't have all the reps he probably should have. We've seen him already miss a little bit of time with some lingering injuries, whether it just be hamstrings or some other stuff that he's had from like his wrist surgery and stuff like that in the offseason. And you just wonder if his style of play is going to be conducive to where he's going to have time on the field. And if that's the case, it's like, okay, we have Tedero McMillan. We have Jalen Coker. Adam Thielen, for the most part, has been a very reliable player for this team. He has missed only a little bit of time with the team. So you start looking at all that, and it's like, okay, like this is where Xavier Legette has to put it together, and it has to be this year. I think this is a put up or shut up year for him. I said about Mingo and Bryce Young last year. Bryce Young got benched, came back, looked great. I think Xavier Legette, he has all the potential, but you got to be able to stay on the field, and you got to be able to catch the football. And if he can do those two things, he's going to take a step in the right direction. But that is my hesitation with a player of his caliber.
Yeah, he's got to catch. Like, that's what it comes down to. And I think that when you're able to put him at a more natural position, the Z position, right? Because he did have to play the X role after Deontay Johnson was traded last year. Obviously didn't suit him. He's not a sideline winner. We saw that quite a bit. The Saints game, the Chiefs game, even in one instance in the Eagles game, he's not going to win along the sideline, but over the middle, I think, is where he can thrive, again, especially against like smaller nickel defenders. Did you have any other positive regression you wanted to hit on? It's hard for me to say a rookie is going to regress, but I think certainly Caleb Williams will improve now that he has Ben Johnson calling the plays instead of Waldron and Thomas Brown, and he has 3 new starters along the interior, similar to Detroit. Actually, that entire division outside of Green Bay has 3 new starters in the interior, and I know Green Bay has at least one with Aaron Banks, so that's an interesting wrinkle in the NFC North. But I think Williams will be closer to average than one of the worst QBs in the league this year. I know he put up volume stats, but his efficiency stats were really, really bad. We talked about how bad Stroud's was. Caleb Williams was below that, like one of the worst in the league. I think he'll regress more toward league average now that he has grown-ups in the coaching room and hopefully a more cohesive offensive line.
He's going to be given a lot of easy buttons with Ben Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Can he capitalize on it? That remains to be seen. Like I think the one concern with Caleb Williams is just he missed a lot of open throws last year. And then when you look at the additions that they made to the defensive line, Joe Tooney, he's been an all-star. His past 2 stops, whether it's the Patriots or the Chiefs. But the other 2 guys, Drew Dahlman, missed time last year with the Falcons. Reason why they let him walk. They were okay with his backup and how he played. You go to Jonah Jackson. He's missed a lot of time with the Los Angeles Rams for the past couple of years. That's why they were okay trading him. So now you just traded all this capital that you could have poured into younger guys that you could have been developing along an offensive line that really wasn't that bad. Like when you look at time to pressure, like Caleb Williams, the pressure came after 2.5, 2.7 seconds. That like if I was Ben Johnson, and I understand he is all about the trenches, but when you take gambles on injury-prone guys, and then there's a potential that those guys that were supposed to kind of give you an edge don't even play, then all of a sudden you're stuck with the same interior offensive line that wasn't bad, and now you have Caleb Williams kind of running around and maybe doing too much ad-lib. And instead of doing, I think, what Canales did with Bryce Young last year, and it's like, ball's got to be out 2.7 seconds or less. And maybe he says that this offseason. I'm not going to like put words in Ben Johnson's mouth when he hasn't had these conversations, or at least it hasn't like come to like national media attention. And that's where it's just like, that's what I think should have been hammered more, is because a lot of the pressure that Caleb Williams faced was from holding onto the ball too long, not making a decision. That wasn't Jared Goff's issue in Detroit. Like the guy could make a decision. He just like literally got skittish under pressure. So you had to make sure everything was clean and laid out for him so he could make his reads and make that throw.
The one hopeful part of your argument, I'll say, is maybe Ben Johnson can tell him what to watch on film, as opposed to the Bears coaches last year who allegedly wouldn't watch film with Caleb Williams or tell him what specifically to work on there. Other side of the coin, I don't know if it's fair to expect Jaden Daniels to be like a superstar in year 2. You know, we watched Stroud regress, even though it was in large part due to the circumstances around him. I think it's hard for somebody to follow up such a historic rookie season like Jaden Daniels. So maybe he goes closer to the mean. Maybe he doesn't and is just actually a top 3 or 4 QB in the league. Like, we'll have to see, but I think it's fair to expect that he goes a little bit closer to the mean. Any other people that you think will go from the bottom toward the mean to from the top to the mean? Any players you want to mention before we wrap up?
So to go along the point of where I was just talking about Caleb Williams and his offensive line, I really do think the Commanders beefed up theirs. Like the Laramie Tunsil trade, you obviously have him at left tackle, but that fixed 2 positions because now you slot Brandon Coleman, your draft pick who played admirably well at the left tackle position. You get to put that big body at left guard. Sam Cosmi isn't going to be back until probably at the halfway point, maybe a little bit later. So kind of like that playoff run as things are ramping up.
They drafted a left tackle as well, so he could step in for Cosmi.
Right. I would say right tackle with Josh Connerly, and I think he'll play opposite.
I'm saying he played left tackle, but he could step into the right side for the time being.
True.
Is what I mean.
And that's absolutely true. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying is like I when you start listing off Tyler Biadasz, who they signed, I obviously just mentioned Josh Connerly. You start feeling good about like 4 of the pieces on that offensive line, even without Sam Cosmi being in that picture. So that's where I feel really comfortable about them. And I think the X factor for them is going to be Terry McLaurin. So like he's wanting a new deal. You need him in the building. Like he was your true X wide receiver. And I think he's going to open up a lot of things. Zach Ertz, we didn't talk about him. He's a guy that I think is due for regression. He played all 17 games last year, was a huge crux in terms of what the Commanders offense was. I think Ben Sinnott maybe takes some of that. I think not Jesse Barnes.
I know who you're talking
Bates.
about.
It's Jesse. I think it's Jesse Bates.
Jesse Bates is the safety. John Bates, I think, is the tight end.
Maybe it's John Bates, but it's Bates is the last name. He is their, I think, backup tight end, and he got re-extended. So I think those are guys where it's like I think they're going to take more of a role than Zach Ertz, but I think Terry McLaurin becomes the X factor for Jaden Daniels, and obviously any point of regression. I think if Terry misses time, similar to Nico Collins, That I think throws it for a loop. But Jaden Daniels' legs, I mean, Cliff Kingsbury will just run a RPO offense and make it work in the absence. So I think that's about it. Purrfect Takes for an episode on regression. I'm going to say that Tyreek Hill. What should be the point? I'm trying to think like the threshold, because I think he regresses, but I want to say that he gets less than 5 touchdowns, less than 900 yards, and less than 70 catches. And I think he had over 80, over 900, and over 5 touchdowns last year. So it's a continual drop down for Tyreek Hill. I don't think he hits some of those benchmarks. Now, maybe he does the year after that in a new spot. I just think with Tua Tagovailoa, the Miami Dolphins offense kind of being a little shaky in terms of the trenches, that they aren't going to be built to compete the way they have in the past couple of years.
I think that's fair. You said 80 receptions, or was it 70?
Less than. He had over 80. So
okay.
Yeah, less than 80 receptions. So if he ends up with like 75, 857, and 4 touchdowns, like that's not enough. So
yeah, I like that one. I think that's fair to expect. In the team department, I'm going to go more in a different direction. The top 10 of the draft, I know the draft was almost 2 months ago now. It went Titans. Obviously, Browns were number 2, so I'm going to call them number 2. Giants, Patriots, Jaguars, Raiders, Jets, Panthers, Saints, Bears. I think at least 5 of those teams won't be in the top 10 of next year's draft. And the teams I'll stake my claim on a couple teams in particular. Don't think that the Jags are going to be a top 10 team picking next year. I don't think that the Jets will pick in the top 10. And I think the Panthers won't pick in the top 10. So those are a couple out of that group. But I think at least half of this year's top 10 team pick teams won't be in the 2026 top 10 of the NFL draft.
So you're pretty much saying that the majority of them are going to land in that 11 to 20 spot.
Because they're going to be closer to the mean. Whereas a team like the Miami Dolphins, which picked 13th, I think they can take somebody's spot. Or a team like the Atlanta Falcons, who I think might not be as good as the Falcons think they are. They might drop a bit as well. So I think at least 5 of the top 10 this year will have graduated, regressed toward 16, and not be in the top 10 next year.
Okay. I that's an interesting one. I'd have to look back at like the historical numbers to see how often that happens, to see kind of where, like, if typically like 4 teams aren't in the top 10, like if you're really that off, or maybe I'm thinking in my head that like you have a little bit more consistency year to year, especially with the top 10 teams.
Yeah, for sure. I had a note written down a couple of weeks ago on a pod we did, and it was how many teams pick in the top 5 over the last 5 years. And there were, I think, 17 or 18 teams with a top 5 pick. So that's kind of my inspiration. There's going to be turnover, right? Like just 2 years ago, we saw the Texans picking second. We saw the Seahawks. Well, they had the Broncos picks up, but the Broncos were up there. The Rams were up there a couple years ago. The Chargers were up there 2 years ago. There's a lot of turnover there. All it takes is one good, not one good prospect, but one good run to take you out of that group. I think that quite a few of the teams that picked in the top 5 this year, if things fall right for them, can be in that 11 to what's the out of playoff range, 18, somewhere in there. Whereas a team from that range, maybe the Bengals, might fall into the top 10 if their offense can't produce otherworldly numbers again, because I think their defense is somehow going to be worse. But I think that's where my take is heading.
Okay. I think that's about all we have today. Next week, we'll either continue our Mount Rushmore series or bring another topic to you like this. I don't know. Like, we've been doing the Mount Rushmore tiers to where I don't know if we do like the 2020 all-decade team at some point, maybe towards the end of that'll be a fun one. Mm-hmm. Another one that we'll probably bring about, especially before we do the division breakdown, is probably like an NFL tiers, where we kind of rank teams in certain tiers, talk about kind of the thresholds for those, the expectations we have for those teams heading into 2025. But yeah, like I said, this is probably about all we have for this week. Anything you want to say before we sign off?
Yep. You can find us on Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your content. And as always, leave your mark.